In the first-class cabin of Flight 732, everything seemed perfect. Frosted champagne glasses, soft music playing in the background, until a sharp sound rang out a slap. The cabin fell silent. Dozens of phones were raised. The person being slapped was a woman of color, dressed in a sophisticated black suit, her eyes still calm mid the storm of glances. The person who did it, a flight attendant, with a face that was a mixture of anger and contempt, had just whispered a sentence that chilled everyone who heard it. No one in the cabin knew that. In a few minutes, this plane would witness one of the most painful power reversals in the history of aviation. The woman who was humiliated was not just a passenger. She was the owner of the entire airline. And when that truth was revealed, everyone had to ask themselves, what makes people lose their humanity when they believe they have more power than others? And how does one maintain dignity, even when publicly humiliated? If you believe that true justice does not require shouting, but only the truth, please like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to join us in the story where silence also has the voice of justice. The cabin of Flight 732 shimmered with the quiet luxury of a weekday morning. First class was half-full business travelers wrapped in soft gray suits, fingers sliding across tablets, the scent of citrus polish and coffee suspended in the air. Outside, the sky over Harbor View was a clean blue, the kind of day that promised no surprises. Inside, one was waiting. Naomi Carter sat in seat 1A. Her posture was calm, her presence unobtrusive, someone accustomed to being seen, yet never needing to announce herself. She glanced once at the window, then at her phone. A notification glowed briefly. Payment processed, before she locked the screen. Across the aisle, a flight attendant adjusted her scarf. Claire Whitmore, 32. Hair pulled tight, smile tighter. She had done this route 100 times. She knew who fit in and who didn't. The boarding door hadn't closed yet. Claire scanned the manifest, then the passengers, her eyes halting at Naomi's seat. Something in her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow moving across her face. Naomi looked up when she sensed it. "Ma'am," Claire said, voice clipped but polite. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi blinked once, surprised but obliging. She handed it over. Claire studied the ticket longer than necessary, flipping it as if searching for proof of a forgery. "This is for first class," she said, tone carrying the faintest tremor of disbelief. "You're sure you didn't mean 14A?" A pause stretched thin between them. Naomi smiled small, restrained. "I'm quite sure." Around them, a few heads turned. Nothing explicit, just a shared curiosity, the subtle tightening of atmosphere that happens when someone challenges an unspoken rule. Claire exhaled, lips pursed. "All right, ma'am," she said finally, returning the pass, "just making sure." But she didn't move on. Her eyes lingered, judging, measuring. Something behind them was unraveling. Moments later, as she leaned in to adjust Naomi's seatbelt tag, a coffee cup from the galley slipped from another passenger's tray, splashing near Naomi's shoes. Naomi reached for a napkin, but Claire was faster. "Please, I can handle it," Naomi murmured, but the attendant's hand brushed hers away. Too sharp to be accidental. "Let me," Claire said. "We wouldn't want you to stain that designer suit." The words carried weight sarcasm disguised as courtesy. Naomi's lips parted, but she said nothing. She simply looked at her, the kind of look that made silence feel louder than sound. In that moment, Claire's professionalism cracked. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe envy. maybe the lifetime accumulation of quiet bitterness that needed somewhere to land. It landed in her palm. The sound came first sharp, hollow, startlingly human. A slap that sliced through the luxury hush of first class. Naomi's head turned with the force, her earring catching the cabin light as if the world itself had blinked. Gas broke like dominoes. Phones lifted. The air became a vacuum of disbelief. "Security will deal with you," Claire hissed under her breath trembling. "You people think money can buy decency." No one spoke. Not the man in 1B. Not the older couple 2 rows back. Not the junior attendant frozen by the galley curtain. Naomi's hand hovered near her cheek, but didn't rise. Her face flushed where the skin had met skin. Her eyes stayed steady, locked on the woman who had just struck her. I could scream. I could destroy her right here, she thought. But she didn't. Instead, she inhaled slow, deliberate, like someone taking back control of her own heartbeat. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm enough to frighten. "Are you finished?" Claire blinked, uncertain. "Excuse me." Naomi straightened her jacket. "Your hand, your words. Are you finished?" That was all. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the engines outside seemed to wait. "From somewhere behind," a passenger whispered. "Did she just slap her?" Another muttered, "Oh my God, is she filming this?" Dozens of screens glowed now, tiny judgments recording every breath. Claire turned pale as awareness caught up to her, but pride wouldn't let her retreat. "You need to calm down." "Ma'am," she said too loudly, voice brittle. "I'm doing my job." Naomi's reply was almost a whisper. "Then you should do it better." She sat back, eyes forward, spine like marble. Her stillness frightened more than anger ever could. For a moment, the world shrank to 2 women and a single, unbearable truth. One had power, but didn't know it. The other had power and couldn't see it, slipping away. A male attendant hurried over, confusion in his tone. "Claire, what happened?" She was being aggressive," Claire stammered. She tried to, but Naomi didn't argue. She didn't explain. She let the lie hang there, suspended and obvious. Every witness could feel the imbalance, the raw arrogance of it. Sometimes, silence is the loudest defense. The captain's voice cracked through the intercom, oblivious. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Claire stepped back, trembling slightly. The red mark on Naomi's cheek began to fade, replaced by something quieter composure. The phones kept recording. Outside, the tug vehicle began to push Flight 732 away from the gate. Inside, the flight attendant who thought she'd won the moment had already lost something far greater. No one knew yet. Not the passengers replaying the slap in their minds. Not the junior attendant whose eyes darted between the 2 women, trying to decide what right looked like. But the balance of power in that cabin had shifted imperceptibly, permanently. Naomi turned her face toward the window again. Her reflection stared back calm, intact, unbroken. "I've been here before," she thought. "Different rooms, same eyes." The engines roared softly, like a warning, and as Flight 732 began its slow roll toward the runway, the woman everyone had just seen humiliated remained motionless, while the one who had struck her began to shake. Justice, as it turned out, was already boarding 3 hours earlier, before Flight 732 pushed back from the gate. The morning light over Harbor View shimmered like polished steel. Lakeside International Airport was already awake. Rolling suitcases, coffee steam, the rhythm of departures like a living clock. A black sedan pulled up at the private terminal. The driver stepped out first. Tall, discreet, trained in the art of invisibility. He opened the rear door, and Naomi Carter emerged, the kind of woman who carried her silence like armor. She adjusted the cuff of her cream blazer and glanced once at the sky, as if checking its mood. "Good morning, Ms. Carter," the driver said. "Morning, James." Her voice was soft but final. She didn't linger in small talk. She didn't need to. Inside the terminal, her steps echoed against marble floors. The clerk at the premium check-in counter straightened instinctively, sensing authority before even seeing the name on the reservation. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Flight 732 to Harbor View West is ready for boarding in 40 minutes. Would you like an escort to security?" "No, thank you." She smiled politely. "I'll walk." She preferred to move alone. The line at the security gate was long, full of early executives, influencers, and the occasional nervous honeymooner clutching passports. But Naomi's pass allowed her through the priority lane, no questions, no glances, no chatter. The guard scanned her ID, nodded once, and let her through. Her bag glided into the X-ray machine. Her heels clicked once, twice, and then the sound disappeared into the white hum of the terminal. Beyond the checkpoint, the world softened. The hum of luggage wheels, distant announcements, the slow waltz of people pretending to hurry. Naomi paused by a wide window overlooking the runway. A plane was just lifting off, sunlight slicing across its body like a blade. She checked her phone. A dozen unread messages waited in her encrypted inbox. She opened them one by one, quick approvals, funding summaries, a press draft about Aurora Air's next sustainability partnership. She typed short replies, concise, surgical. Then she hesitated at one message marked private. It was from her financial advisor. The subject line read Education Grant, Renewal Confirmation. She opened it. A message blinked. Payment processed. Brookfield Academy Fund, 25,000 housed USD. She exhaled quietly, almost imperceptibly. No one around her would ever know that the scholarship fund under anonymous benefactor 304 belonged to her. The same fund that quietly paid tuition for 36 children across the city, some she'd never met, some whose names she'd only seen on invoices. Good deeds don't need signatures. She slipped the phone back into her bag. Across the terminal, a young mother was struggling with her stroller, the baby wailing, a bottle rolling under a bench. Naomi knelt, retrieved the bottle, and handed it back with a small nod. The mother smiled, embarrassed. "Thank you," she whispered. Naomi only said, "Safe travels." Then she kept walking. Her gait was calm, the kind that came from years of moving through rooms where people didn't expect her to belong. She knew how to carry herself like a quiet contradiction, a black woman in spaces built to exclude her, yet too composed to be refused. The lounge was quiet. Inside, a television murmured headlines about the economy. Two businessmen at the bar were discussing fuel prices, their laughter low and sharp. Naomi didn't listen. She preferred silence. It told the truth faster. She ordered green tea and opened a file on her tablet. Numbers lined the screen, route analytics, performance ratios, and pending reports from the operations team. She made notes with a stylus, her face impassive, her eyes steady. Every movement was deliberate, every choice measured. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was her assistant, Hannah. "Board meeting in 2 hours. "Want me to brief the legal team first?" Naomi typed back. "Yes. And tell PR to hold all statements until I land." Then she added, after a moment's pause, "And Hannah, remind the HR division to finalize the anti-bias training schedule this week." "Will do." came the reply. Naomi sipped her tea and leaned back. The irony of it would come later. The fact that on this very morning, she had been reviewing Aurora Air's diversity policies. At that moment, she was simply a traveler waiting for her flight. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her father, a man who once told her that power wasn't in the voice that shouted, but in the one that didn't need to. She still heard him sometimes, especially before meetings or flights. Stay still. Naomi, let others rush. You'll see clearer when the noise passes. She smiled faintly. The airport, with all its noise, felt like a lesson in patience. A boarding call sounded in the distance. Aurora Air Flight 732 departing for Harborview West. Now boarding Group 1. Naomi closed her tablet, finished her tea, and rose. Her driver had already sent a message confirming the luggage transfer. Everything was as it always was ordered. Controlled, efficient. Yet beneath that perfection, something unseen was waiting. She reached the gate. The attendant scanning passes looked barely 20, nervous but polite. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome aboard." Naomi smiled. "Thank you." As she stepped into the jet bridge, a chill of recycled air brushed her face. She walked slowly, absorbing the sound of her heels on metal flooring, each step a quiet punctuation mark. She didn't notice the flight attendant standing inside the cabin, straightening a pillow, her expression tight with fatigue. Claire Whitmore. Their paths would cross in less than 15 minutes, but neither woman could have guessed how violently their worlds would collide. Naomi stopped briefly near the cockpit door, greeting another crew member with a nod. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin herself. Despite the young attendant's offer to help, "It's fine," Naomi said. "I prefer to keep it close." A simple gesture, a small assertion of control. She sat, adjusted the air vent, opened her phone once more. The notification from the grant payment still glowed faintly. She looked at it for a long second, as if the words themselves carried weight. Payment processed. The irony again, how many lives she touched quietly, and how little she would be recognized for it. She didn't mind. Recognition was for the insecure. Impact was for the steady outside. Ground crew, loaded baggage. The hum of engines grew louder. Inside, Naomi Carter, CEO of Aurora Air, closed her eyes for a moment, not in fatigue, but in readiness. Sometimes the day you give the most is the day the world takes something back, she thought. Then she heard it, the calm voice of the captain, overhead, distant yet familiar. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Green. Welcome aboard Aurora Air Flight 732. Naomi's eyes opened. The camera, if there were one, would pull back now through the narrow aisle, through the walls of polished aluminum, out into the sky. Everything looked calm, but calm was only ever the surface. The crew briefing room of Aurora Air was a place where light never felt warm. It came from fluorescent tubes that hummed faintly above rows of metal chairs, casting a pale blue sheen on every uniform and face. The smell of coffee and pressed fabric lingered in the air like routine itself. Claire Whitmore sat near the end of the table, her back straight, her eyes slightly glazed from lack of sleep. She had been awake since 4:30, packing lunch for her son and making sure the rent check was sealed. The envelope still sat inside her purse, waiting for payday. Captain Walter Green entered first. His voice carried authority, but also a quiet weariness born from decades in the sky. "Morning, team," he said, setting a tablet on the table. "Flight 732, Harborview to Westport. 4 hours, mild weather, full cabin in first. Let's keep it smooth." The others nodded the co-pilot. the junior attendant, Evan Brooks, and 2 others who were new to the route. Only Claire spoke. "Copy that, Captain." Green's eyes flicked toward her briefly. He respected her efficiency. She'd been flying with Aurora for nearly 9 years. Reliable, never late. But reliability came with cracks, the kind that only showed under stress. He went over the safety updates, customer briefings, the new service guidelines. When the meeting adjourned, chatter filled the room. Plans for layovers, weekend errands. Claire didn't join in. She stayed behind, staring at the message glowing on her phone screen. Payment received. Brookfield Academy tuition. Semester 2. Her chest rose once, shallowly. Relief and confusion mixed together like oil and water. She hadn't told anyone that she'd applied for a scholarship for her son, Lucas. The boy was 8, too bright for the public school that kept losing teachers, too gentle for the rough edges of their neighborhood. The private academy cost more than she made in a month. She'd applied anyway, one of those desperate acts you do without expectation. And then, last week, an email had arrived. An anonymous donor has covered the full tuition for the next 2 years. No signature, no note, just a transaction. Lucky. One of her coworkers had said when she mentioned it, "Someone must have liked your story." Claire had laughed it off, but part of her hated the idea of charity. She told herself it was a foundation, maybe a diversity initiative. That was easier to swallow. Now, sitting under the harsh light, she scrolled down to the attached receipt. Paid in full, amount $25,000. Benefactor ID 304. Her fingers hesitated on the screen. She whispered under her breath, "Whoever you are, thank you." Then, quieter. "One day, I'll stand on my own again." Evan approached, holding a clipboard. "You all right?" Claire looked up, forcing a smile. "Fine. Just reading something about my kid's school. Lucas. Right. The little guy who loves planes. That's the one." Her smile grew real for a second. "He still thinks I'm flying the plane." Evan chuckled. "Well, in a way, you are." He gestured toward the cabin diagram. "You make people feel safe. That's half the job." She appreciated the kindness, but something in her stiffened. "Yeah," she said softly. "Some people make it easier than others." Evan tilted his head. "You mean the passengers. Some of them," she said, eyes drifting to the window where a line of limousines was pulling up to the private terminal. "You'd be surprised how ugly politeness can sound when it comes with entitlement." He didn't answer. There were things you learned not to argue about in an airline crew room. Captain Green called out from the door. "Whitmore, you're lead on first class today. Keep the service tight. We've got VIPs on board company clients, a few executives from partner firms. Be sharp. Understood. Captain." The title lead carried no raise, only extra responsibility, but she took it as pride. Still, the word VIP had a way of twisting inside her. She'd spent years watching those passengers treat her like furniture-handing jackets without eye contact, snapping fingers for wine, talking over her as if she were part of the background hum. She'd seen the looks too, the kind that measured her age, her tone, her hair that no longer obeyed the salon-perfect rules of her 20s. Each one left a small mark. They don't see me, just the uniform. A smile when they need something. Silence when they don't. She finished her checklist and headed to the crew locker. The mirror above the sink showed a woman holding herself together, light makeup, red lipstick slightly faded, the Aurora pin aligned just right. She dabbed perfume on her wrist, checked her nails. For a second, she saw fatigue in her own reflection. Not the kind from lack of sleep, but from trying to stay composed in a world that never really let her exhale. She straightened again. "You can't let them see cracks," she muttered. As she walked back into the hallway, her phone buzzed once more. A text from the Academy, Lucas's first report card available online. "Excellent progress." She smiled again, an involuntary, fragile joy. But beneath it, the same question lingered. Who was behind the scholarship, and why her? She dismissed the thought and focused on the task ahead. She needed the job. The bills wouldn't pay themselves, and Lucas deserved stability. In the briefing lounge, the TV flickered with a headline about corporate diversity programs. A reporter's voice said something about Aurora Air's new initiative, led by its young CEO, Naomi Carter. Claire barely noticed. The name slid past her consciousness like background noise, something she'd heard once but never filed away. She was more concerned about the roster 2 hours to pre-board, a half-hour delay to accommodate a special guest in first class. Special guest, she thought. Probably another executive who thinks turbulence doesn't apply to them. She closed her locker, the metal door echoing through the empty room. The sound reminded her of her apartment door at night, thin, hollow, easy to open. A final check, hair, uniform, ID badge. She pressed her fingers against the lanyard where Lucas's photo hid behind her name tag. His smile was missing a tooth. "Let's make it through another day," she whispered. Captain Green called the crew to board. They filed out, voices low, professionalism settling over them like armor. Outside, dawn had broken fully. The sky a clean strip of silver over the tarmac. The aircraft gleamed under floodlights, immaculate and indifferent. Claire climbed the jet bridge steps, the hum of engines growing louder beneath her feet. She felt the familiar mix of pride and resentment twist inside her again. She had dreamed once of being a pilot, not a flight attendant, but dreams had bills too, and reality always wins the argument. In the galley. She checked inventory champagne bottles, pressed napkins, chocolate truffles arranged in even rows. Every item screamed luxury, every detail a reminder of where she stood in the invisible hierarchy of the sky. She paused by seat 1A, smoothing the pillow that rested against the headrest. The tag said, "Reserved." She didn't know for whom. Somewhere deep inside. She sighed. "First class," she murmured. Always someone else's first. She moved to the aisle, reviewing her manual. Her fingers brushed the paper smooth, precise, institutional. At the bottom of the page, the Aurora Air logo caught the light. The embossed letters glinted like an irony waiting to happen. Maybe one day I'll be more than just a name tag. But the thought faded as quickly as it came. Duty returned. Voice calm. Posture perfect. Cabin prep complete. She set into her comm, ready for boarding. Outside, passengers were gathering at the gate. Among them was a woman in a cream blazer, carrying silence like a shield. Neither of them knew yet how close their worlds already were. At Gate 12 of Lakeside International, the morning crowd pulsed with the low hum of departures. A soft announcement echoed through the glass hall, and the letters Aurora Air 732. Boarding first class flashed on the screen. Beyond the tinted windows, the aircraft shimmered under pale light, silver wings angled toward an open sky. Naomi Carter arrived at the gate quietly, a tablet in one hand, her boarding pass in the other. She carried the composure of someone accustomed to moving through privileged spaces without flaunting it. Her presence turned heads only after she'd passed an afterimage, not a spectacle. At the same time, Claire Whitmore stood at the jet bridge entrance, her uniform crisp, her heartbeat uneven. From this spot, she could see everything, the hierarchy of travel laid out in neat order, the calm assurance of the wealthy, the subtle impatience of those pretending to belong, and the tired dignity of those who didn't. She straightened the scarf at her neck. Smile. Claire, be polite. Don't think too much. Her mouth obeyed. Her thoughts did not. She watched the passengers line up, scanning faces the way one reads a weather forecast. Some storms, she'd learned, announce themselves by silence. Naomi approached next. The line parted naturally, not from demand, but from the quiet gravity of her step. The gate attendant took her ticket. "Good morning, Miss Carter. First class. Seat 1A. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Naomi said. Her voice was low, controlled, the kind that never needed volume to command respect. As she turned toward the jet bridge, their eyes met for the first time. Naomi's expression was neutral, assessing but kind. Claire's smile faltered. Just a breath. Something inside her reacted, something she couldn't name. Born of years spent being unseen by those she served, and uneasy around those who stood too tall. The moment lasted less than a second, yet it settled like static between them. Naomi stepped forward into the narrow bridge, the sound of her heels absorbed by carpet. Claire followed, greeting other passengers, her voice steady, her pulse not, from behind. She studied Naomi's back, the precise posture, the tailored cream blazer, the confidence that seemed effortless. She walks like she owns the place, Claire thought, and the irony unknown to her was that she did. The air inside the jet bridge was cool and sterile, carrying the faint scent of metal and fuel. The windows framed their reflections side by side. Two women in motion, two outlines moving toward the same door from different worlds. One calm, one clenched. Their images appeared equal in glass, though the world beyond it would never treat them as such. Claire felt a flicker of discomfort she mistook for annoyance. Years of small humiliations had carved reflexes into her, the instinct to anticipate disrespect before it arrived. When she saw wealth, she braced for condescension. When she saw confidence, she called it arrogance. It was a quiet armor, forged by disappointment. Naomi sensed eyes on her but didn't turn. She'd learned to feel the weight of judgment without looking at it. Let them think what they will, she reminded herself. You don't owe anyone a reaction. Ahead, a man in a suit adjusted his cufflinks and offered Naomi a brief nod. The polite recognition one executive gives another. She returned it with the smallest smile. Behind her, Claire saw it and misread it a sign. She thought of yet another privileged connection. As they entered the cabin doorway, the temperature shifted. So did the rules. Inside this polished capsule, manners replaced empathy, and service wore the uniform of grace. Captain Green stood near the cockpit, greeting passengers with his usual half-smile. "Welcome aboard," he said as Naomi passed. His tone carried professional respect. Nothing more. Claire caught it and mistook that, too. Of course he notices her. She turned quickly, guiding another traveler to their seat, but her attention kept drifting back to the woman in 1A. Naomi placed her carry-on carefully in the overhead bin, declined help, then sat down. The movement was economical, unhurried, free of self-importance. She opened her phone, checked a message from her assistant confirming that the legal department had finalized the training initiative. The irony brushed her lips again, a company pushing to end bias, while bias was boarding under its own logo. Across the aisle, Claire adjusted her uniform, pretending to check inventory. Each sound zipper, buckle, latch felt louder than usual. She watched Naomi from the corner of her eye, cataloging details she'd never admit noticing: the gold watch, the stillness, the quiet authority. People like her never have to worry about bills or schools or everything breaking at once. The thought came uninvited, bitter at the edges. They live in glass worlds. We clean the fingerprints. Yet beneath the irritation was something else, an ache she'd buried so long it had changed shape. She wanted fairness, not favor, dignity, not pity, but life rarely handed those to people like her. Naomi looked up briefly, catching Claire's reflection in the polished surface of the window. For an instant, their eyes met again through glass. Neither spoke. It was not yet hostility, only recognition. Two women studying the distance between their lives. The boarding music drifted through the speakers, a neutral melody masking tension. Passengers trickled in, settling with practiced entitlement. Claire's hands moved automatically, gestures honed by repetition, but her mind circled the same thought. She doesn't belong here. Not really. The sentence flashed and vanished before she could examine it, leaving only unease. Naomi, unaware, adjusted the vent above her head and smiled faintly at a child passing by with his mother. The boy waved. She waved back. Claire saw it and felt something twist again, a reminder that kindness, when it looked effortless, could sting. Evan appeared near the galley, balancing a stack of safety cards. Ready for pushback, he asked. Almost. Claire replied. Her voice was normal, her posture perfect. Only the tension in her shoulders betrayed the undercurrent. From the cockpit, Captain Green called out. Whitmore, let's close up once the manifest's complete. Yes, Captain. As the last passenger crossed the threshold, Claire stepped aside, letting the jet bridge door seal behind them. The hum of the engines deepened a low, constant note that felt like anticipation. Inside 1A. Naomi slipped her phone into airplane mode. The screen still showed the words, payment processed. She thought of the students whose futures she'd helped secure, unaware that one of them bore the last name Whitmore. She leaned back, eyes half closed, feeling the rhythm of the aircraft beneath her. Somewhere behind the calm, she sensed that the day would test her patience in ways she hadn't imagined. Claire walked past once more, checking seat belts, her expression composed, her pulse erratic. She paused by 1A, glanced at the passenger's ticket, and said with professional civility, If you need anything, Ms. Carter, please let me know. Thank you, Naomi said simply. The tone was neither superior nor submissive, just even human. Claire nodded, but the sound of that voice stayed with her measured, self-assured, free of apology. She moved on, unaware that this brief exchange had already tilted something fragile inside her. In the glass of the closed cabin door, their reflections aligned for a moment, two figures mirrored in symmetry. The camera of the mind would hold that image, one calm, one clenched, each carrying a different kind of armor. Outside, the jet bridge retracted. Inside, silence took its place. Two worlds, one aisle apart, Naomi thought, and sooner or later, they always collide. The plane settled into its boarding rhythm, soft greetings, the shuffle of luggage wheels, the quiet click of seat belts. First class, as always, looked serene on the surface, but serenity can be fragile. It breaks without sound. Naomi Carter sat in 1A, window seat, the gentle hum of the air vent brushing against her hair. She had taken out her tablet to review a report, her expression unbothered, her posture still. The faintest scent of citrus lotion hung in the air, familiar and clean. Across the aisle, Claire Whitmore adjusted a row of champagne flutes. She moved efficiently, but her eyes kept drifting back to seat 1A. The woman there didn't fit the picture Claire's mind had drawn of a first-class passenger. It wasn't the skin color alone, though, that unspoken bias sat there. Quiet, but undeniable. It was the ease, the lack of apology, the way Naomi seemed to inhabit space without seeking permission. Claire approached, tray in hand. "Good morning," she said, voice pleasant but with edges. "Can I get you something before takeoff? Water?" "Champagne water, please," Naomi replied. Claire nodded, poured the glass, and placed it on the tray table with precision. Then, almost as an afterthought, she lingered. "May I see your boarding pass again, Ms.?" Her tone carried professional courtesy, but her eyes didn't. "Carter," Naomi said, looking up. "You already scanned it." "Yes, I know," Claire said, smiling tightly. "It's just that we had a mix-up earlier with seat assignments. I'd like to double-check." Naomi unlocked her tablet calmly, opened her digital ticket, and handed it over without a word. Claire took it, flipping the screen slightly, as if she were examining evidence. The digital glow reflected off her face, sharp and clinical. "First class, seat 1A. Claire read aloud. "That's quite the upgrade." "It wasn't an upgrade," Naomi said. "Tone even. It was my booking." Claire gave a soft, polite laugh. "Of course. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just that this seat, well, it's usually reserved for our elite loyalty members." The words "are an elite" hung like a quiet test. Naomi held her gaze for a moment longer than most would. "I see," she said finally. Her voice was light, but the air between them shifted, almost imperceptibly. From seat 1B, Philip Mercer, a frequent flyer with a silver tie and corporate smile, glanced up from his newspaper. He caught the exchange and looked away quickly, pretending not to notice, but his hand tightened on the paper. He had seen this dance before. Claire returned the tablet, her fingers brushing the screen longer than necessary. "All in order," she said. "You'd be surprised how many people try to sneak into this cabin these days." Naomi's lips curved slightly. It wasn't a smile, more like restraint dressed as calm. "I imagine you would know," she said quietly. Claire blinked. "Sorry who belongs where," Naomi clarified. "You seem very good at deciding that." The sentence landed softly, almost kindly, yet something in it unsettled Claire, as though she'd been caught staring at herself in an unflattering mirror. She straightened. "I'm just following procedure, ma'am. That's my job." "Then you're doing it thoroughly," Naomi said, almost personally. A silence followed, brief, weighty. Claire broke it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Enjoy your flight," she said, and turned away. The back of her neck flushed beneath her collar. As she walked toward the galley, her chest tightened. She told herself it was stress, nothing more. The passenger had simply misunderstood her tone, but deep down, she knew better. You started it, Claire. You wanted her to feel small. Why? The thought flickered, then was pushed away. Back in 1A. Naomi exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the condensation on the water glass. She didn't look after Claire. She didn't need to. People reveal themselves eventually. Words just speed it up. The man in 1B leaned slightly toward her. "Some people wake up looking for a fight," he murmured, barely audible. Naomi turned her head, her expression neutral. "And some wake up trying to prove they've already won." He nodded once, folding his paper. "You handled it better than most would." Naomi didn't answer. She didn't need validation. Dignity, she'd learned, wasn't a performance. It was a discipline. Claire returned to first class 10 minutes later for the safety check. Her smile had reset to default, but every time her eyes passed Naomi's seat, her voice shifted a half-tone lower, her posture a little stiffer, subtle but sharp. The kind of hostility that hides inside politeness. When she offered a hot towel, her words came wrapped in courtesy, but carried something colder. "Here you go, Ms. Carter. These can get expensive if you're not used to them." A passenger 2 rows back chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was a joke. Naomi said nothing. She accepted the towel, folded it once, and set it neatly on the tray. Her silence felt deliberate, too deliberate. Inside her mind, a quiet thought surfaced. There's power in what you don't return. Claire misread that silence as weakness. She kept testing, small comments dressed as professionalism. "If you need help with the seat controls, just let me know. They're a little tricky for first-timers." Naomi turned her head slowly, her eyes steady but soft. "Do I look like someone who's new to control?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a mirror held gently but precisely. Claire opened her mouth, closed it again, muttered something about policy, and walked away. The rest of the cabin remained quiet, though the tension now had weight like humidity before a storm. Evan Brooks, moving through the aisle, sensed it too. He glanced between the 2 women, uncertain whether to intervene or let the silence run its course. He'd worked with Claire long enough to know when her patience thinned. But he had never seen her this defensive, this sharp. He watched Naomi instead, the way she controlled her breathing, the calm economy of her movements. It was unsettling, even to witness, the kind of calm that doesn't surrender but waits. Claire finished her final checks, adjusting her tone for everyone but 1A. Each word she directed at Naomi came measured, wrapped in thin layers of professional venom, and each time, Naomi absorbed it without visible reaction. The imbalance was almost cinematic, one woman trembling inside the uniform of service, the other mastering silence like art. Outside, the jet door closed. The intercom buzzed with the captain's voice. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." As Claire moved down the aisle, she caught her own reflection in the glass of a passenger's tablet, pale, strained, unkind. She looked away quickly. Naomi reached for her seatbelt, fastening it with care. Her eyes drifted to the window, where ground crew signaled beneath a pale sky. Somewhere out there, her company logo shimmered on the wing. But she didn't look at it long. She was tired of symbols. She wanted proof that change could exist inside the very system she had built. Behind her, Claire's voice rose slightly, addressing another passenger. Too loud, too cheerful. "She's trying to erase the moment," Naomi thought. But some moments stay, no matter how you smile over them. The engines roared softly, the plane trembled, and between row 1A and the galley, a line invisible to everyone else had already been drawn. The aircraft leveled off at 35,000 feet. The hum of the engines a steady background to polite murmurs and the faint clink of glasses. In first class, time always seemed slower, smoother somehow, like the air up here belonged to another world. But under that calm, tension had begun to vibrate too low for words, too sharp to ignore. Claire Whitmore moved down the aisle with her practiced poise. Her smile was intact, her posture precise, but her focus kept circling back to seat 1A. Naomi Carter sat there, quietly reading from her tablet, untouched by the small stings that Claire had thrown earlier, or at least she looked untouched. That calmness, the serenity that refused to break, was beginning to unnerve Claire more than any argument could. She paused by the galley, pretending to reorganize silverware. Evan Brooks, the junior attendant, noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. "Fine," she said too quickly. "Just keeping an eye on a few things." He hesitated. "The lady in one." "She seems fine to me." Claire gave a small, polite laugh. "Of course she does. People like that always seem fine." Evan frowned but said nothing. He'd learned when not to push. He turned back toward the galley door, though part of him stayed uneasy. When Claire returned to the aisle, she stopped at 1A again. Naomi's bag rested neatly beneath the seat in front of her, a black leather tote, structured and elegant. Claire crouched slightly, her tone light, conversational. "Ms. Carter, I'll need to check that your bag's completely under the seat." "For safety." Naomi glanced down. "It is." "May I take a quick look?" Claire asked. "Already reaching." Naomi's eyes lifted. Steady. For what reason, Claire hesitated, her hand hovering. "We've had incidents before. People bringing items they shouldn't. I just like to be sure." Across the aisle, Philip Mercer, seat 1B, looked up from his laptop. His gaze sharpened. He knew that tone, the polite edge of someone testing boundaries. Naomi spoke calmly, but there was something quieter beneath her voice now, something measured. "You're implying I brought something I shouldn't." "Not at all," Claire said quickly. "Just standard procedure." "It's not," Naomi said, "and you know that." For a moment, the hum of the cabin seemed louder. A nearby passenger shifted in his seat, pretending not to listen, but doing it anyway. Evan appeared from the galley, holding a tray. He sensed the charge in the air instantly. "Claire," he said gently, "everything's secured. I already checked the row." She didn't look at him. "I'll handle it." "Evan, but you already," I said, "I'll handle it." The words came sharper than intended, snapping through the calm like a whip. Even Captain Green's voice on the intercom couldn't diffuse the sudden quiet that followed. Naomi didn't move. She simply folded her hands on her lap, gaze unwavering. "If you have a legitimate reason to search my bag, I'll wait until a supervisor arrives," she said. "Otherwise, I'd prefer you not touch my belongings." Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of composure that reveals imbalance in everyone else. Claire straightened, her smile tightening. "You're being defensive, Ms. Carter. I'm just trying to keep everyone safe." Philip set down his laptop. "She's not being defensive," he said mildly. "She's setting a boundary. There's a difference." Claire turned toward him, surprised. "Sir, I'm just doing my job." "Then maybe do it evenly," Philip said. His voice was quiet, but carried weight. "You didn't check anyone else's bags?" Color rose in Claire's cheeks. "With respect, sir, I don't need your commentary." Naomi's voice interrupted, calm but cutting through like clear glass. "You've made your point," she said. "Now please, let's all continue the flight." But Claire couldn't let it go. "You know," she said, laughing softly as if it were casual, "sometimes people book these seats with questionable points. Company cards. Borrowed miles, it happens. You'd be amazed at what people try to get away with." Evan froze in the galley doorway. Philip looked directly at her. "That's enough." Claire's voice dropped. "I wasn't accusing anyone," she said, still smiling, but her eyes betrayed the irritation boiling underneath. "I was speaking generally." Naomi didn't blink. "No, you weren't." The words hung there, gentle but heavy. Around them, other passengers began to sense that something was wrong. A few glanced up, phones quietly shifting in their hands, lenses pointed without being obvious. Evan stepped forward again, lowering his voice. "Claire, please, let's step aside." "I said I've got this," she whispered, though her hands trembled slightly now. "You don't understand." "Some people," Naomi's voice cut through, still soft, but it carried the quiet gravity of someone long used to this game. "Some people, what Claire swallowed, forget it." Naomi looked away, back to her tablet, as though dismissing the entire exchange. But the air had changed. Something inside Claire cracked a mix of embarrassment and defiance. She turned away, straightened her uniform, and retreated toward the galley. Behind her, Philip exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. Evan lingered for a moment near Naomi. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly. "She's been under a lot of pressure." Naomi nodded once. "We all are," she said. "Pressure shows character." Her tone was not cruel, just factual. Evan looked at her, unsure how to respond, then nodded and stepped away. For the next several minutes, silence reclaimed the cabin. But it wasn't peace. Claire busied herself with tasks she didn't need to do, rearranging trays, checking service carts, writing notes she'd never read again. Her pulse was still high. She hated how easily that woman had disarmed her without raising her voice. She hated that others had noticed. When she finally looked back at 1A, Naomi was staring out the window, serene. That composure felt like mockery. Claire didn't see dignity, she saw challenge. And somewhere deep, unspoken and shameful, she thought, who does she think she is outside? Clouds drifted below like endless cotton, the light above them clean and merciless. Inside, the balance of power had already begun to shift, though none of them fully understood how far it would go. A soft vibration ran through the cabin as the plane adjusted course. A passenger in row 2 whispered, "You get that on video?" Another nodded faintly. The tiny red light on a phone camera blinked once, then vanished back into the shadows. Naomi didn't notice, or maybe she did, but she didn't turn around. Some people fight with anger. Others, she knew, fight with stillness. And stillness, when held long enough, can be the loudest weapon of all. The cabin light dimmed to its mid-flight glow, a soft amber tone meant to soothe, not expose. But under that calm, something brittle had formed a tension that hummed just beneath the hum of the engines. It was invisible at first, the kind that hides in polite smiles and rehearsed manners, waiting for one careless second to become real. Naomi Carter sat still, scrolling through her phone, reviewing a document marked Aurora Air Employee Ethics Brief. The irony wasn't lost on her. The timing wasn't either. She adjusted the screen brightness, her reflection faint in the black glass, an image of someone who had learned to survive in dignity without breaking into anger. From behind the curtain, Claire Whitmore reappeared, carrying the authority of someone who needed to reassert control. Her steps were sharp, her expression neutral in that brittle way that's anything but. Evan Brooks noticed immediately. He'd seen that look before when irritation turns into justification. Claire approached 1A again, her voice low but taut. "Ms. Carter, I'll have to ask you to put that phone away until we reach cruising altitude." Naomi glanced up. "We already are." "Regardless," Claire said, "you're not allowed to record during takeoff or descent. It's for everyone's safety." "I wasn't recording," Naomi replied evenly. "I was reading." Claire's tone didn't soften. "I'll need to see it." Naomi blinked once, incredulous. "Excuse me, your phone," Claire said. If you're not recording, it shouldn't be a problem to show me. The row fell silent. Philip Mercer, seated in 1B, froze mid-page of his newspaper. Evan stepped forward from the galley, already sensing where this was going. "Claire," he said quietly, "it's fine. FAA rules don't require." "I know the rules." "Evan," she cut in sharply, "I've been doing this for 12 years. Her gaze turned back to Naomi. "Phone, please." Naomi's hand rested lightly on the device. "You're asking to search a passenger's property. You know that's not part of your authority." "Then maybe you shouldn't act suspicious," Claire said before she could stop herself. The words dropped heavy, not loud, but loud enough. Philip's eyes flicked between them. A few passengers nearby glanced up, subtle but alert. They could feel the change in air pressure, though the plane hadn't moved. Naomi's voice came quiet but clear. Suspicious, Claire tried to backtrack, but her tone betrayed her. "You've been defensive since you boarded. You people always." The sentence never finished. Silence devoured the rest. Naomi's eyes hardened not with anger, but something colder, a knowing that stretched far beyond this moment. "You people?" she repeated softly. "Say it clearly. Ms. Whitmore. What kind of people?" Claire flushed. "That's not what I meant, but that's what you said." Evan stepped in now, his voice trembling just enough to betray nerves. "Claire, please, let's just take a breath." But it was too late. Claire reached forward, snatching for Naomi's phone. The movement was sudden, almost reflexive, born of frustration masquerading as authority. The phone slipped, caught between their hands for a single second that stretched long enough for every eye nearby to notice. The sound of glass against metal rang out as it fell, hitting the armrest before tumbling to the floor. Naomi's wrist twisted with the pull. A faint red mark appeared, bright against her skin. The cabin froze. Evan gasped. Claire stopped. Claire froze too, her own hand hovering in midair as though realizing only now what she had done. But pride, quick and poisonous, forced her to stand tall. She was refusing a safety request, she said loudly, to no one in particular, to everyone at once. Naomi didn't move to pick up the phone. She looked at Claire with a calm so complete it felt unnatural. Her voice came low, precise, the kind that silences without volume. "You just crossed a line." The color drained from Claire's face. "I didn't." "You put your hands on a passenger," Naomi said, "and you lied about safety to do it." Her tone was steady, but her breathing deepened, not out of fear. Control required air. Evan crouched, picked up the phone, and set it gently on Naomi's tray. The screen was still on, glowing faintly with a line of text board meeting ethics implementation. "Final approval." Philip finally spoke, his voice a gravel whisper. "I saw everything." Claire turned, startled. "Sir, please." He shook his head. "Don't. Just stop talking." Claire's mouth opened, but no sound came. She looked around the cabin. Every passenger she could see had eyes on her now. Some phones were lifted, subtle, but recording. The camera of public judgment had arrived. Naomi didn't look at them. She was staring at her own reflection again, faint on the dark screen of her phone. The red mark on her wrist pulsed softly, fading. Inside, a thought surfaced, quiet and steady. "If I let anger speak, I lose the point." She adjusted her sleeve, covering the mark, then looked up. "You owe me an apology, Ms. Whitmore." Claire blinked, speechless. Evan's voice broke the silence. "Claire, do it." For the first time. Claire looked frightened, not of Naomi, but of herself. "I didn't mean you did," Naomi interrupted, still calm. "That's the problem." The engines hummed louder as the plane began a mild turn. The motion made Claire sway slightly, one hand gripping the seat for balance. It was a small, unintentional gesture, but in that moment, it looked like she was the one holding on. Naomi leaned back slowly, her posture returning to stillness. "You should call the captain," she said. "We'll need to document this." Claire's throat tightened. "There's no need to escalate." "There already was an escalation," Naomi said. "You created it." Evan reached for the intercom. "Captain Green," he said quietly. "We have a situation in first class." The response was immediate. "Understood. Keep it calm. I'm sending someone up." Claire stood there, silent now, her face pale, her hands trembling as if she'd only just realized what she'd done. The cabin, once soft and luxurious, had turned into a stage. Every whisper of fabric, every quiet inhale, sounded like judgment. Naomi's eyes softened, not with pity, but understanding. "You thought you could make me small," she said gently. "You just made yourself smaller." Claire turned away, blinking hard, jaw set as if that could hold back whatever was unraveling inside her. Evan placed a hand on Naomi's arm, careful not to startle her. "Are you okay?" Naomi nodded once. "Yes, but she's not." The cabin door opened behind them. The first officer stepped out, face composed, unaware of what he was about to walk into. Claire straightened instinctively, pulling the mask of professionalism back onto her face, but her hands betrayed her still shaking, still red. Naomi looked down at her phone one last time. A message had appeared on the lock screen board chair meeting confirmed for noon. She almost smiled. Timing, again. As the officer approached, the low murmur of passengers filled the air, half outrage, half disbelief. "Somewhere," someone whispered. She grabbed her wrist. Another said, "I got it on video." Naomi didn't respond. She sat quietly, hands folded, eyes forward. Control, she'd learned long ago, was not silence. It was choosing what silence meant, and right now, hers meant power. The hum of the engines carried on, steady and indifferent, as if the sky itself refused to take sides. But everyone in that cabin knew something irreversible had just happened. The line between dignity and disgrace had been crossed, not by accident, but by choice. Claire stepped back, heart pounding. In her mind, the justification loop began to form. I was just doing my job. I was just following rules, but it no longer sounded true, not even to her. Evan glanced at Naomi once more before retreating toward the galley. He knew what would come next, a report, a reprimand, maybe worse. But what stayed with him was not the act, it was the silence after. Naomi's silence, heavy, certain, unshakable. The kind that doesn't need justice to arrive, because it already has. The cabin had gone unnaturally still, that thick kind of silence that lives between embarrassment and disbelief. Engines droned low beneath the floor, steady and indifferent, but everything human inside the aircraft felt taut, overheated. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. It was as if the air itself was listening. Claire Whitmore stood in the aisle between seats 1A and 1B, her chest rising fast beneath her uniform. The lines around her mouth had hardened into something fixed, defensive. She had crossed too many lines to walk backward now, and she knew it. Naomi Carter sat before her, hands folded neatly on her lap, expression unreadable. A faint red mark still circled her wrist, but she didn't hide it anymore. She didn't need to. The whole cabin had seen. Evan Brooks lingered in the galley, half in shadow. He wanted to intervene, but he also knew when authority, no matter how misplaced, demanded its own stage. Claire's tone had changed. It carried the kind of brittle confidence born of panic, and panic always wants an audience. "Ms. Carter," Claire said. Voice clipped. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy class until the captain can determine the appropriate course of action." Heads turned. Even the sound of ice shifting in glasses stopped. Naomi blinked slowly. "Excuse me," I said, Claire repeated. "Louder now. You'll need to move. You've disrupted the cabin. You've made the crew uncomfortable, and you've refused to comply with instructions." Her words hit the air like small, sharp stones. Everyone could hear the desperation hiding behind the authority. Philip Mercer set down his newspaper again, the page trembling faintly in his fingers. "That's not true," he said quietly. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Claire ignored him, her gaze fixed on Naomi. "Please gather your belongings." Naomi didn't move. No. The refusal was so calm it almost didn't sound like defiance. It was simply a fact spoken aloud, as if gravity itself had shifted slightly in her favor. Claire's mouth twitched. "Ma'am, this isn't optional. I'm giving you a lawful instruction." Naomi's voice stayed low. "You're giving me an order based on something else entirely." A ripple moved through the seat's passengers, exchanging glances. Phones raised in cautious angles, the whisper of digital eyes capturing everything. Claire noticed, and something in her broke again. "You can't film me," she snapped suddenly at the passengers. "You do not have permission to record." But the red dots of camera lights didn't blink off. If anything, more appeared. "Ms. Carter," she said again, voice trembling between anger and fear. "Stand up. Now." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Why?" "So everyone can see the woman you decided doesn't belong here." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried. Even in the back rows, people heard the evenness of her voice, how it cut cleaner than shouting ever could. Claire's breath caught. "You're twisting my words." "Am I?" Naomi asked. "Because every word you've said has been about who belongs where, about who looks like they fit this seat, about control." Claire's cheeks flushed a deep red. "You know what? Maybe if you didn't act like you were above everyone else." Naomi's voice sliced through, soft, but absolute. Above or equal. The question hung there, weighty, merciless, equal. It was the word no one said, but everyone felt. Philip murmured to himself, "God help her." But he wasn't talking about Naomi anymore. Claire's hand shook. "Don't play the victim," she said. "Louder now. You think you can use that tone, that attitude, because you're one of those." She stopped herself, but too late. The word hovered unsaid, poisonous and clear. Naomi didn't react right away. She simply breathed once, then looked her straight in the eye. "One of those. What?" "Ms." Whitmore Claire's voice cracked. "I didn't say. But you thought it." Naomi's tone barely above a whisper. "You thought it the second you saw me. For a long moment." Claire said nothing. Her throat moved, but no words formed. Then came the last drop, the one that spills everything. "You know what she said," forcing a laugh that didn't sound human. Maybe you're just one of those diversity hires people who get everything handed to them because companies are scared of bad press. Maybe that's how you got here. Maybe that's how you got that ticket. The air left the cabin. Even the engine seemed to fade. Passengers stared, mouths half open, as the words echoed against the narrow walls of privilege she'd just built around herself. Naomi's eyes didn't widen. They didn't narrow either. They simply steadied. "A diversity hire," she repeated softly. That's what you think this is." Claire shrugged, desperate now, clinging to what little power she had left. "It's what a lot of people think. They just don't say it out loud." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Then maybe that's why we never move forward." The quiet returned thick, almost physical. A man coughed softly in the back, the sound brittle. A woman whispered, "Is this really happening?" Somewhere. A phone caught the red reflection of the Aurora Air logo on the cabin wall. Naomi finally rose from her seat, every movement precise. Claire took an instinctive step back. The shift was subtle but powerful, the way a lion might move without roaring. "I'm not moving to economy," Naomi said, "and you're going to stop talking now." Her tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was simply true. That truth, spoken plainly, was unbearable. Claire laughed once, too loud. "You think you can tell me what to do? You think you can." Naomi raised her hand, not to silence her, but to steady herself. "I don't need to think," she said. "I already know." The voice came from somewhere behind her. Then Philip, quiet but sure. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "you need to stop before this ruins you." She turned toward him, wild-eyed. "You don't understand." He nodded slowly. "I understand exactly." The whole cabin was still. The low light painted every face in shades of disbelief and discomfort. Phones caught everything: Claire's flushed skin, Naomi's stillness, the way power was shifting without force. For the first time, Claire seemed to realize where she was not just on a plane, but inside a story she no longer controlled. Her jaw worked, but no sound came. Then, in one final flail toward control, she snapped, "If you don't comply, I'll have you escorted off this aircraft. You'll never fly with Aurora again." Naomi's reply was soft, almost tender. "That might be difficult," she said. "Given that I own it." Gas rippled through the cabin. Claire blinked, her expression blank for a moment, then twisted as if the words didn't fit reality. "You what?" Naomi didn't answer. She simply sat back down, quiet as before. Her calm returned like a tide. Claire stood frozen, mouth half open, as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet, which, in a way, it had. Evan stepped forward at last, voice steady. "Captain's on his way," he said quietly. But no one looked at him. Every eye was still on the woman in 1A. Naomi folded her hands, that faint red mark visible again under the cabin light. "You should take your seat now," she said gently to Claire. "The rest of this can wait until we land." It wasn't a threat. It was mercy. Claire's lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Slowly, she turned, walking back toward the galley, her reflection broken into fragments by the polished surfaces she passed. Each step sounded louder than it should have. The plane kept moving forward, steady through the sky, while inside, everyone remained suspended, unsure whether they had witnessed humiliation or revelation. Naomi leaned back, exhaling softly, not in victory, but in relief. "Don't gloat," she told herself. "Just breathe." It wasn't triumph. She felt it was the exhaustion of being forced to prove she belonged somewhere she had already built. The red light of a passenger's phone flickered again, catching the faint curve of her profile against the window. Calm, deliberate, unbroken. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough to make every person in that cabin rethink what they'd just seen. Sometimes, justice doesn't shout. It just sits quietly, letting everyone else hear their own echoes. The hum of the engines filled the cabin again, steady and smooth, a sound meant to quiet the mind. But no one in first class felt calm. Every movement now was deliberate, every glance sharper than it should be. The air between 1A and the galley was thick with the kind of tension that happens when truth starts to slip through cracks. Naomi Carter sat quietly in her seat. Her posture was composed, her face unreadable, but her phone resting face up on the tray betrayed motion. The screen kept lighting up, one notification after another. The first buzzed faintly, then another, then a third. Board chair. Urgent confirmation required. Legal debt call when safe to do so. Communications team media contact request pending. Each line appeared briefly before dimming again, leaving a faint glow against the silence. The nearby passengers tried not to stare, but the light drew their eyes anyway, flickering like a secret that refused to stay hidden. Evan Brooks stood near the galley, half turned toward the cockpit, tablet in hand. He wasn't supposed to look, he knew that. Company policy forbade using internal systems for personal curiosity. But something about what Naomi had said, about owning the airline, didn't feel like just pride. It felt true. Behind him, Claire Whitmore leaned against the counter, pale and tight-jawed. She was trying to control her breathing, but the humiliation clung to her like static. The moment played over in her mind again and again, the calm way Naomi had said, "I own it." It had sounded absurd, like something said out of spite. But the way the passengers reacted, it wasn't laughter. It was recognition. Evan's fingers hovered over the screen. He typed quietly into the crew app, the company's internal directory. It wasn't something flight attendants usually accessed mid-flight, but the thought wouldn't leave him alone. Naomi Carter. He entered the name and hesitated for a second before hitting search. The system loaded slowly, as if resisting what it was about to reveal. Then the results appeared. At the top of the list, Naomi E. Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Air Holdings. A headshot appeared beside it, professional, poised, unmistakably her. The same calm eyes that now stared out the window from seat 1A. Evan's breath caught. He looked up instinctively, half expecting her to turn, to somehow know he'd just confirmed the impossible. But she didn't move. She sat still, serene, as though she'd already predicted exactly how this would unfold. Behind him, Claire straightened slightly. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice sharp from fear rather than authority. Evan didn't answer right away. His mind was racing, piecing together every moment since boarding. The fast security lane, the sleek car that had dropped her off, the quiet composure that never cracked. It all fit now, in a way that made his stomach twist. He turned the tablet toward her. "Look." Claire hesitated, then leaned closer. The logo on the corner of the screen caught her eye. First the deep blue and silver Aurora Air emblem she'd worn for years without thinking about who owned it. Then her gaze fell to the name, Naomi E. Carter, Chief Executive Officer. For a heartbeat. She didn't move. Her mind refused to connect the image on the screen with the woman sitting just 10 feet away. "No," she whispered. "That's not... No, that can't be her." Evan's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "It's her." Claire's throat tightened. She backed up a step, her hand gripping the counter for balance. The sound of her own pulse drowned out the engines. The humiliation she'd felt before deepened into something else: terror, disbelief, the slow realization that she hadn't just insulted a passenger. She had insulted the person who could decide whether she kept her career. Evan looked from the screen to the cabin. Naomi hadn't moved, but her phone buzzed again. This time the notification lingered longer, long enough for Evan to catch a glimpse. PR response team social media alert trending. Aurora Air flight incident. First class discrimination? Evan swallowed hard. "Oh, God," he whispered. Claire heard him and turned sharply. "What is it?" He hesitated, then met her eyes. "It's already out there." She blinked, uncomprehending. "Someone recorded it," he said. "The passengers? They uploaded it." Her face drained of color. She pushed past him, peeking out toward the cabin. But the looks she met from the first-class seats weren't just judgmental. Now they were protective, loyal, as if they'd already chosen sides. And she wasn't on the winning one. Naomi looked up just then, catching her in mid-motion. Their eyes met across the short distance, and Claire froze. There was no anger in Naomi's face, no smirk of satisfaction, only quiet clarity, the kind that makes excuses impossible. Naomi's phone buzzed again. She tapped the screen once, silencing it. Then, with deliberate calm, she turned it face down and folded her hands over it. Evan's voice trembled. "Miss Carter," he said, stepping closer. I didn't realize." Naomi looked up, her gaze softening slightly. "It's all right. Mr. Brooks, you treated me with respect." Her tone was simple, sincere. But when she turned to Claire, her voice cooled. "I wish I could say the same for everyone." Claire opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Naomi continued, "You have a choice now. You can either continue defending what you did, or start learning from it." The quietness of her words carried more weight than shouting ever could. Claire's eyes burned, and for the first time she couldn't look at Naomi directly. Evan stood still, torn between duty and awe. He had seen angry passengers, arrogant ones, even powerful ones. But he had never seen someone wield power so gently that it stripped the room bare of pretense. Behind them, a faint chime from the cockpit interrupted the moment the captain signaling a routine announcement. Claire flinched at the sound, as though the real world had returned too soon. Naomi didn't look up. "When we land," she said quietly, "I'll speak with the captain and with HR. There's a process for this." Her tone wasn't vengeful. It was administrative, inevitable, the voice of someone accustomed to consequence. Claire swallowed, tears pressing at the edges of her control. "I didn't know," she whispered. Naomi met her gaze one last time. "That's the problem. You never tried to." The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and unaware. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly into Harborview. Local time is 10:22 Skies clear. Temperature 68 degrees. The normalcy of the words felt surreal. Evan looked down at his tablet again, the screen still open to Naomi's profile. The corporate bio was clean and formal. Executive leadership and global operations, diversity equity initiatives, and employee advocacy. Underneath, a tagline she herself had approved years ago. "Respect is not policy, it's practice." He exhaled quietly. "She really lives it," he murmured. Claire sank slowly onto the jump seat in the galley, staring at her trembling hands. The uniform she'd once worn like armor now felt like evidence. Naomi turned her face back toward the window. Below them, the ocean shimmered like glass, smooth and vast. Her reflection in the window pane looked almost serene. Almost inside, a quieter thought lingered, one she would never voice aloud. Even when you hold the power, it still hurts to be reminded why you need it. The seatbelt sign chimed on. Passengers began to stir, whispering softly, unsure how to act after witnessing so much truth packed into so small a space. Evan powered off his tablet, his expression distant. He knew nothing on that screen would ever leave his mind. And Claire, small now, silent, just kept staring at the floor, waiting for the world she'd built out of habit and hierarchy to land, knowing it might not survive the impact. The descent began quietly, the kind of hush that comes before something final. The plane tilted slightly, nose angling down toward Harbor View, the skyline a distant shimmer below. Yet inside the first-class cabin, no one seemed to notice. The air was heavier than altitude alone could explain. Captain Walter Green stepped out from the cockpit, his calm presence slicing through the tension like a practiced hand through smoke. Years of experience had given him a face built for control, steady eyes, voice low but firm. "I was told there's been a situation," he said, scanning the faces before him. Naomi Carter looked up from her seat, poised as ever. Claire Whitmore stood a few feet away, pale and trembling, her uniform now a costume that no longer fit. Evan Brooks hovered near the galley, his expression somewhere between dread and duty. Philip Mercer remained seated in 1B, silent witness to the unraveling of pretense. Captain Green turned to Claire first. "Ms. Whitmore, I'll hear your report." Claire straightened, grasping at professionalism like a lifeline. "Captain." This passenger became verbally combative. She refused to comply with safety instructions, and I had Naomi's voice cut through, calm and level. "That's not what happened." Green's head turned toward her. There was no irritation, only curiosity, as though he'd already learned not to trust first versions of any story. "Ms. Carter," she said evenly. Then, after a pause, "Naomi Carter." Claire flinched. Evan's fingers tightened around the tablet at his side. Naomi reached into her leather briefcase, moving with the precision of someone who has never needed to explain herself twice. She withdrew a single card, thick and white, embossed with a faint metallic gleam. The cabin lights caught it just right. The Aurora Air logo shimmered in silver foil above a line of text that seemed to command silence all on its own. She held it out to Captain Green. He took it carefully, as though touching something fragile, and read the words aloud in a low murmur. "Naomi E. Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Air Holdings." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the engines seemed to dull. Claire blinked, her mouth opening slightly. "That's not there must be." Evan stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's true, Captain. I verified it on the internal system. She's listed as the CEO." The card caught the overhead light again, the raised letters reflecting back into Claire's wide, disbelieving eyes. The logo, her logo, gleamed on the same surface that now spelled out the name of the woman she had humiliated. Captain Green exhaled slowly, the realization settling into his posture. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone shifting with a mix of respect and regret. "I had no idea you were on board." Naomi nodded slightly. "That was intentional." Claire took a small, unsteady step backward. I didn't know," she whispered. Naomi looked at her without malice, just measured disappointment. "You didn't need to know my title to treat me with respect." The words landed harder than any reprimand could. Claire's eyes flickered, searching for something, an apology, an escape. Maybe both, but all she found were the faces of passengers watching. Phones still raised, judgment already written. Captain Green turned toward Naomi again, professional instinct kicking in. "Ms. Carter, I can assure you that a full report will be filed immediately. The airline will." She interrupted gently. "The airline will do what's right." He hesitated, reading the subtext. "Yes, ma'am." Philip leaned forward from 1B, speaking for the first time in several minutes. "Captain, with all due respect, This woman, he gestured toward Claire, wasn't just unprofessional. She was cruel. We all saw it. A murmur rippled through the cabin, low voices. Agreement, unease, the quiet solidarity of strangers who had witnessed too much. Naomi raised a hand slightly. "That's enough," she said. Her tone was soft but final. "This isn't about humiliation." Evan looked at her, genuinely confused. "Then what is it about?" Naomi's gaze turned inward for a moment before she answered. "Accountability." Claire lowered her head, the word pressing down on her like weight. Naomi reached for her phone, which had been buzzing again with messages: legal debt, public affairs, board chair. She silenced them with a single swipe, then looked back at the captain. "You'll receive an internal memo when we land. I'll handle this through the proper channels." Green nodded, his respect now fully visible. "Understood." Naomi turned her attention to Claire one last time. Her eyes weren't cruel, they were clear. "Ms. Whitmore, when you looked at me, you saw something you thought was less. That's what concerns me most." Claire's voice broke. "I swear, I didn't mean." Naomi's voice cut softly through the denial. "You meant every word. You just didn't expect consequences. The words weren't said for vengeance, they were said for truth. And truth has a way of echoing longer than anger ever could." Philip leaned back, his jaw tight, his respect for the quiet woman in 1A written across his face. Evan stood motionless, tablet still glowing faintly in his hand, the corporate profile of Naomi Carter staring back at him like a reminder of what real leadership looks like. Captain Green returned the card to Naomi, his tone subdued. "For what it's worth, Miss Carter, on behalf of the crew, I'm deeply sorry." She took the card back, tucking it neatly into her briefcase. "Thank you, Captain, but save your apology for her." Green turned toward Claire, whose tears had finally broken free, streaking through the heavy powder of professionalism. "Ms. Whitmore," he said quietly, "you're relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight?" She nodded without protest, the strength in her voice gone. "Yeah, sir." Naomi sat back as the captain retreated toward the cockpit, his face a mask of solemn efficiency. The hum of the engines grew louder again, carrying them closer to land. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Philip said softly, almost to himself, "You could have destroyed her. Right here." Naomi looked at him, a faint smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "That wouldn't teach her anything." He nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected. "You're a better person than most." Naomi turned her gaze toward the window. "No," she said. "Just someone who's tired of proving she deserves to be here." Outside. The sunlight caught the curve of the wing, scattering a reflection across the cabin wall. It landed briefly on her business card, now resting on the tray beside her coffee. The embossed logo shimmered in the soft light aurora air, a symbol not of power, but of what power could become when held without cruelty. The cabin stayed quiet until the landing gear lowered. Somewhere in the back, a child whispered to his mother, "She's the boss." The mother nodded, whispering back, "Yes, she is." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the steady rhythm of descent. She wasn't angry anymore, just resolute, because in the silence that followed, she understood that dignity, once seen, could not be unseen, and that, perhaps, was justice enough. The wheels touched the runway with a soft jolt. The cabin exhaled as one, but in seat 1A, Naomi Carter remained perfectly still, calm, certain. The sky had already bowed to her without a sound. The plane had rolled to a smooth stop at Gate 17, but no one moved. Passengers remained seated, restrained not by seatbelts, but by the thick silence that had settled over the cabin. The faint hiss of the air system was the only sound, followed by the metallic groan of the jet bridge locking into place. Naomi Carter sat still in seat 1A, her briefcase closed, her phone quiet at last. Her reflection shimmered in the window beside her, a composed woman in a tailored black suit, outwardly calm, inwardly weary. The kind of calm that doesn't come from serenity, but from discipline. Captain Walter Green appeared at the front of the cabin again. His voice, normally steady, held a note of hesitation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until we complete deplaning procedures. Then, lower. Directed at Naomi's security is waiting outside the jet bridge, per your request." Naomi nodded once, her tone cool. "Thank you, Captain." Claire Whitmore stood near the galley, small and shaking, eyes red from silent tears. Her hands fidgeted with the edges of her apron as if tidying her uniform could somehow tidy what she'd broken. Evan Brooks stayed close, saying nothing, his expression a quiet mix of sympathy and respect for both women, in different ways. The door opened with a hiss. A flood of sterile light from the terminal spilled in, bright and cold. 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared in the doorway, their silhouettes sharp against the glow. The sight made several passengers shift uneasily in their seats. Claire's breath caught. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Please." This isn't. Naomi rose from her seat slowly, every movement deliberate. She turned to the officers and gestured toward the galley. "That's her," she said softly. Claire stumbled forward, words tumbling out in panic. "Please, Ms. Carter, Naomi, don't do this. I have a son. He's only 8. Please." The mention of the child hung in the air, human and raw. For a brief moment, even Naomi's eyes softened. Then she inhaled deeply and faced Claire squarely. "You should have thought of him before you did what you did," Naomi said. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was precise, controlled, like a surgeon's cut meant to remove rot, not cause pain. Having a child doesn't excuse your choices. If anything, it should have made you better. Claire's mouth trembled. "I swear, I didn't mean for it to go that far. Naomi interrupted gently. "You meant every action. You might not have thought through the consequences, but you meant the choices." Captain Green stood between them now, silent, his eyes on the floor. He had seen plenty of disciplinary moments in his career, drunk passengers, unruly tempers, but never this kind of reckoning. This wasn't chaos. It was order finding its way back. The security officers waited, unsure if they were supposed to escort or simply observe. Naomi nodded to them slightly. "You'll take her statement at the gate. HR and legal will handle the rest." Claire took a step forward, desperation overtaking dignity. "Please, Ms. Carter, I've given 15 years to this company. I've worked doubles, holidays. I've done everything right. I lost control." Naomi looked at her with something close to sadness. "You didn't lose control. Claire, you revealed it." The words seemed to hollow the air between them. Passengers began to stand slowly, collecting their belongings, but not daring to move toward the door. Everyone understood this wasn't just protocol. It was consequence unfolding in real time. Phones that had once filmed the humiliation now recorded something quieter, heavier accountability. Evan stepped closer, his voice soft. "Miss Carter," he said, "if it's all right, I can walk her out." Naomi considered him, then nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." He placed a gentle hand on Claire's shoulder. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's go." Claire wiped at her face, eyes swollen, and looked back at Naomi one last time. "You're right," she said in a shaky voice. "I did mean it. All of it. I just didn't think it mattered." Naomi's reply was almost tender. "That's why it matters most." The officer stepped aside as Evan led Claire down the jet bridge. Her figure looked smaller with each step. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her own actions. The bright light at the end of the tunnel washed over her until she disappeared from sight. Captain Green exhaled, as though the whole plane had been holding its breath until now. "You handled that better than anyone else would have," he said quietly. Naomi shook her head. "No, I handled it the way it needed to be handled." He nodded, reluctant but respectful. "We'll make sure the report is clean." Naomi gathered her bag and briefcase, pausing before turning toward the exit. "Captain," she said, her voice softer now, "the report doesn't have to protect anyone. Just make sure it tells the truth." He hesitated, then said, "Yes, ma'am." As she stepped toward the door, a few passengers murmured words of support, small phrases like, "Thank you," and "You did the right thing." She acknowledged them with a quiet nod. Nothing more. Power, when worn correctly, never needs applause. The jet bridge was bright and cold. Claire's sobs echoed faintly from somewhere near the terminal, a human sound swallowed by mechanical hums. Naomi walked past the waiting officers without slowing, her heels clicking against the floor in steady rhythm. Each step was both an ending and a beginning. Evan followed at a distance, watching her silhouette recede into the sterile light. He would remember that walk the way strength could exist without spectacle, the way justice could whisper and still be heard. When Naomi reached the gate, she stopped. Claire sat on a bench between the officers, hands folded, face buried. For a long moment, Naomi just looked at her. Then she spoke quietly, almost like a prayer neither of them deserved, but both needed. "I hope your son grows up kinder than you were today." There was no hatred in her voice, only finality. She turned and walked away. Behind her, the airport noise rose again, the chatter, the boarding calls, the endless rhythm of travel. Life moved on, indifferent as always. But for those who had been on Flight 732, something small but irreversible had shifted. In the glass reflection of the terminal windows, Naomi's figure passed beneath the glowing Aurora Air logo. The symbol gleamed over her shoulder like an unspoken reminder authority doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply arrives, looks you in the eye, and waits for you to face the truth. I remember thinking if justice had a sound, it wouldn't be loud. It would sound exactly like this moment, the faint echo of footsteps walking away from what's broken, toward something cleaner. The air inside the terminal was cold and dry, the kind of air that carried silence longer than sound. Passengers from Flight 732 had stopped pretending not to watch. They lingered by the gate, drawn to the invisible gravity that still bound the two women standing near the glass wall. Naomi Carter had stopped walking. She stood with her back to the runway, face calm, eyes fixed on Claire Whitmore, who sat slumped on a bench beside the security officers. The tears had slowed now, leaving the hollow kind of stillness that comes when a person runs out of denial. Evan Brooks stood a few steps away, unsure if he should stay or retreat. Even Captain Green, who had followed them off the plane to oversee the report, seemed uncertain where authority ended and something deeper began. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Naomi reached into her briefcase, drew out a small white envelope, and held it lightly between two fingers. "You mentioned your son," she said quietly. Claire looked up, startled. Her voice came out thin and brittle. "Lucas? Yes, he's all I have." Naomi nodded once, as though confirming a fact she already knew. He attends Brookfield Academy, doesn't he? Claire blinked, confusion and fear crossing her face. How do you? Naomi handed her the envelope. Open it. Claire hesitated, her fingers trembling as she pulled at the seal. Inside was a printed letter official, with the Brookfield Academy crest at the top. Beneath it, a short note of acknowledgement. We extend our gratitude to the anonymous benefactor whose continued generosity has made possible the full scholarship of Lucas Whitmore, 2023-2025 academic term. Below that, a stack of payment receipts, each stamped paid in full, each signed under the same name in discreet corporate Inc. Aurora Air Community Initiative. Fund allocation N. Carter. For a few seconds, Claire didn't move. Her eyes skimmed the page again and again, as if repetition could undo what she was seeing. Then her knees seemed to fail her. The paper slipped from her hands, fluttering to the polished floor. Naomi didn't look down. She simply said, 2 years ago, your son's application came across my desk. His grades, his art portfolio, his teacher's note about his mother working double shifts. I approved the sponsorship myself. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, her voice breaking. You paid for his school? Naomi's tone stayed even, though softer now. I believed in giving children a chance they didn't ask for, but deserved. I didn't know your name then. I didn't need to. The words hit like a slow wave, gentle in sound, devastating in meaning. Around them, people pretended to check phones, to look away, but no one really did. The world had shrunk again to those few feet of polished tile, the woman who'd given and the one who'd taken everything for granted. Claire's breathing came uneven. Oh my God, I said those things to you. Naomi cut her off quietly. You said them because that's who you chose to be in that moment. Her tone wasn't angry. It was surgical. Truth stated without embellishment. Claire's sobs deepened, her body curling forward as though folding under invisible weight. I thought, she stammered, I thought you were just another rich passenger, someone who'd never understand. Naomi looked at her for a long time before replying, and yet, I understood more than you think. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Naomi's face, something raw, almost weary. I grew up watching my mother wear a uniform like yours, she said. She served people who never learned her name, people who thought kindness was weakness. I learned early that dignity doesn't depend on the seat you're in. Evan swallowed hard, eyes glistening as he looked between them. Captain Green stayed still, hands clasped behind his back, head bowed slightly, as if bearing silent witness to something sacred. Claire's tears fell freely now. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she whispered. Naomi's reply was calm, measured. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you recognize. She knelt briefly to pick up the fallen papers, smoothing them against her palm. Your son will keep his scholarship, she added. He shouldn't suffer for what you did. Claire's head jerked up. You mean you're not canceling it? Naomi looked at her with the kind of tired compassion that doesn't excuse, but understands. No, but you'll have to explain to him why you're no longer working here. The statement landed like a quiet verdict, not shouted, not dramatized, simply inevitable. A hush spread wider across the gate area. Even the airport announcements in the background seemed to fade beneath the weight of the moment. The line between punishment and mercy had never looked thinner. Claire covered her face with both hands, the sob that escaped her carrying years of bitterness, fear, and the sudden awareness of how small cruelty looks when held up to grace. Naomi rose, straightened her jacket, and turned toward the exit. As she began to walk away, Claire's voice broke through the silence, trembling but sincere. "Ms. Carter, why, after everything I said, why would you still help him?" Naomi stopped but didn't turn around. "Because he's not you," she said, "and because if I stop believing in people's potential to change, then I become what you thought I was." Then she walked on, the light from the terminal windows following her down the corridor like a quiet benediction. Evan stood frozen, unable to move for a moment. He felt something unexplainable settle inside him, something like hope, though quieter, almost reverent. Captain Green placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "That," he said softly, "is what leadership looks like." Claire remained seated, face buried in her hands, the scholarship letter resting beside her like both a curse and a salvation. Through the blur of her tears, she could just make out the words, "Aurora Air Community Initiative." She had worn that logo over her heart for 15 years and never once thought about what it meant. Now, for the first time, she understood. Somewhere beyond the glass, Naomi's figure disappeared into the brightness of the terminal, absorbed by the ordinary rhythm of travelers who would never know what had happened there. And yet, the silence that followed seemed to say everything. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply breathes and forgives. I remember thinking, if power ever truly redeems itself, it looks like that one woman walking away from revenge, carrying nothing but her dignity and the truth that mercy, too, can be a form of justice. The jet bridge hummed faintly with recycled air and the echo of footsteps. It was late morning, but inside the narrow metal corridor, time had flattened into something colder. Claire Whitmore stood near the open cabin door, her uniform disheveled, her badge half torn from her lapel. Her face was drained of color. 2 airport security officers waited just beyond the threshold, their expressions neutral, professional, detached. One of them gestured toward the terminal. "Ma'am, we'll escort you out now." Claire didn't move at first. Her eyes darted toward Naomi Carter, who stood only a few feet away, speaking quietly with Captain Green and Evan Brooks. Naomi's posture was calm, her tone even too even, the kind of composure that made the contrast unbearable. The passengers in first class were still seated, watching. The buzz of whispered conversations had stopped minutes ago, replaced by a silence that pressed down like weight. Every person there understood they were witnessing something final. Claire took a shaky breath. "Please," she said softly, "don't do this in front of them." Naomi turned to her, her expression unreadable. The consequences were never private. "Claire, neither is accountability." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the cabin, reaching even the last row of first class. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. One woman bowed her head. Another murmured, "Good for her." Evan stepped slightly forward, unsure if he should intervene. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "HR's waiting at the gate. They'll handle the termination paperwork," and Naomi stopped him with a small nod. "I know." She turned back to Claire. "You'll receive official notice today. You'll also receive information about your son's scholarship." Claire's lips trembled. "I thought you said he could keep it." Naomi's expression softened. "Just slightly. He could have. But after what you told the press outside the terminal this morning, the board reviewed your conduct. They ruled it as a breach of the moral code attached to the scholarship. I'm sorry." The words landed like a final blow. Claire staggered back a step, one hand gripping the cabin wall. Her breath came shallow. "No, please, not Lucas. He didn't do anything." Naomi's eyes lowered, her voice a quiet truth. "You're right, but every action we take writes the world our children inherit. This one, you wrote yourself." For a moment, Claire looked like she might collapse. Her hand went to her chest, fingers brushing against the small gold pin she'd worn for years her flight wings. They had always meant pride, belonging, a place in the sky. Now they felt heavy, hollow. Her fingers fumbled, catching the edge of the pin until it snapped free. It fell to the floor with a faint metallic clink, rolling once before stopping near Naomi's shoes. Naomi didn't pick it up. Claire's tears came quietly now, not in waves, but in small, defeated tremors. 15 years, she whispered. "I gave this company everything." Naomi looked at her evenly. "And for 15 years, that company gave you chances to be better than this." The security officers stepped forward again, gentle but firm. One of them said, "Ma'am, we'll take you to HR now." Claire nodded faintly. She reached for her carry-on bag, but the strap slipped through her shaking hands, spilling its contents onto the cabin floor lip balm, a folded boarding manifest, and a crumpled letter from Brookfield Academy. The top line showed only 2 words before it folded under itself: "Tuition paid." She bent down instinctively, but Evan crouched first, gathering the scattered papers. As he handed them back, his voice was low and kind. "I'm sorry it ended this way, Claire." Her reply was almost a whisper. "So am I." When she straightened, her reflection caught in the cabin mirror across from the galley. She barely recognized herself, the eyes too wide, the uniform too tight, the dignity gone. It wasn't just a career ending. It was a version of herself she would never get back. Naomi stepped aside to give her space to leave. She didn't speak again, didn't add one more word to what had already been said. Claire walked past her slowly, stopping just once to look up. "You could have ruined me in 1,000 ways," she said softly. "You chose this." Naomi met her gaze. "No, Claire, you chose this. I only stopped pretending not to see it. That was the last exchange." Claire crossed the jet bridge between the uniformed officers. Her footsteps were uneven, her shoulders trembling. As she neared the gate, one of the passengers began to clap softly at first, then joined by another. It wasn't applause for spectacle. It was relief. A release of tension built from the moment that slap had echoed across the cabin hours earlier. The sound grew for a few seconds, hesitant and respectful. Some passengers joined in, others simply exhaled. Evan looked toward Naomi. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't even turn around. When the sound faded, Naomi finally addressed the passengers. "On behalf of Aurora Air," she said, her voice steady, "I sincerely apologize for what you experienced today. You deserved professionalism, and instead, you witnessed failure. We'll do better." The simplicity of the words carried more weight than any speech. Captain Green nodded from behind her. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may now deplane." As people began to rise, Naomi's business card slipped from her folder, landing face up on the floor near the door. A passenger stooped to pick it up. The light from the cabin reflected against the embossed silver letters, "Naomi E. Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Air Holdings." The man hesitated, then handed it back to her with quiet reverence. "You didn't have to say sorry," he murmured. Naomi accepted the card with a faint, polite smile. "That's exactly why I did." Evan lingered as the cabin emptied, still shaken by how calmly she carried herself. You handled that differently than I would have." Naomi looked at him. Anger teaches no one. Silence. Sometimes. Does. When the last passenger had left, Naomi turned toward the empty seats. The air still held traces of what had happened: fear, shame, relief, the echoes of power lost and dignity reclaimed. She reached down, picked up the fallen flight pin from the floor, and set it gently on the service counter. "For the record," she said quietly, almost to herself, "no one ever wins by breaking someone else. We just make the world smaller." Outside, through the open door, she could see Claire being led down the corridor. Her figure looked smaller now, like a shadow pulled thin by regret. Naomi watched her go until the last flicker of her uniform disappeared into the terminal light. Then she turned away, picked up her briefcase, and walked back through the cabin toward the gate. The sky outside was bright, unyielding. The same sun that had witnessed everything still shone indifferently over Harbor View. I remember thinking justice doesn't always punish. Sometimes it simply ends things in the quietest way possible. And in that silence, every person who had seen what happened, Evan, the captain, the passengers, understood something they hadn't before. That power doesn't need to shout, and dignity, when kept intact, can humble an entire room without raising its voice. As Naomi disappeared into the light beyond the jet bridge, a steward stepped inside to begin cleaning the cabin. He found the CEO's card still glinting faintly on the floor, where it had fallen again face up, perfectly centered in the aisle, under the reflection of the Aurora Air logo. The name shimmered beneath the cabin lights like the last word in a long, necessary lesson. 8 months after Flight 732, the marble steps of the Harbor View Federal Courthouse were lined with cameras, reporters, and the restless murmurs of a public that had not forgotten. The winter air was sharp and clear, each breath rising like smoke. The bronze scales of justice above the entrance glimmered in the morning light, almost too symbolic for what the day would bring. Inside courtroom 6B, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and paper cold, official, expectant. Claire Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped tightly in her lap, wrists trembling just enough to make the silver bracelet she wore tremor against the desk. The same bracelet she'd once worn to every flight shift. Her uniform was gone now, replaced by the plain gray suit issued by the court. Across the aisle, Naomi Carter sat quietly, her posture unyielding yet calm. No jewelry, no entourage, no show of victory. She had testified the day before and had returned today only for the verdict. Her lawyers sat beside her, but she hadn't spoken to them since morning. Sometimes silence carries more dignity than any defense. Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered from the chamber door, a tall woman in her 60s whose reputation for moral clarity was nearly as famous as her rulings. The courtroom rose in unison. She adjusted her glasses and spoke in the even, deliberate cadence that left no room for misinterpretation. "This court reconvenes in the matter of the United States versus Claire Whitmore," she said. "Defendant charged under Section 42 of the Civil Rights Act and under Title 49 concerning conduct endangering the safety and dignity of airline passengers." The words fell like cold iron. The prosecutor, a young man with a clipped tone and steady gaze, stood and approached the bench. "Your Honor, after 8 months of review and testimony, including from over 40 witnesses and a comprehensive audit of Aurora Air's internal complaint system, we have reached a conclusion. Ms. Whitmore's actions were not an isolated lapse of judgment. They were part of a persistent pattern, 15 years of discriminatory behavior enabled by institutional neglect. He clicked the remote in his hand, and a screen flickered to life behind him. Rows of data, years of ignored reports, small incidents that had accumulated into something damning. The numbers were simple, but the silence they revealed was unbearable. 47 complaints, he said, pointing to the chart. 47 employees and passengers who came forward, every one of them dismissed, overlooked, or quietly archived under insufficient evidence, until Flight 732. The courtroom murmured. The sound was low, disbelieving. Claire's head hung lower. Her attorney, a tired man in a dark suit, leaned close to whisper something, but she didn't answer. Her lips moved soundlessly, some silent repetition of a prayer or apology. Judge Whitaker raised her hand for quiet. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, "you have been given every opportunity to speak in your defense. Is there anything you wish to add?" Before sentencing, Claire rose unsteadily. Her voice, when it came, was small. "No, Your Honor, only that I'm sorry. Not for what happened to me, for what I became." The judge studied her for a long time before responding. "Regret is valuable, Ms. Whitmore," she said, "but it's not a substitute for accountability." She turned to the bench and began reading from the prepared decision. This court finds the defendant guilty on all counts. Considering mitigating factors including prior service and dependent child, the court sentences Claire Whitmore to 24 months in federal custody, followed by permanent disqualification from employment within the aviation industry. Additionally, a civil fine of $120,000 will be levied, with 30% allocated to the Civil Rights Enforcement Fund. There was no gasp, no outburst, just a quiet, heavy exhale that rolled across the room. The judge continued, "This verdict does not merely concern one individual's wrongdoing. It exposes a system that tolerated bias, normalized humiliation, and forgot its moral duty to equality. That ends here. Let this serve as precedent for every company that values silence over truth." Her gavel struck once, sharp and final. Claire didn't cry this time. She simply sat back down, pale and still, her hands folded neatly, almost as if by reflex, the same way she had done during every safety demonstration for years. The courtroom began to move again, reporters typing, photographers repositioning, but she seemed detached from it all. Naomi remained seated, her expression unchanged. She didn't look triumphant. If anything, she looked tired, as though justice had arrived too late to bring her any satisfaction. Outside, flashbulbs exploded through the courthouse doors as the news broke. Aurora air discrimination case ends with historic conviction. Commentators would later call it a turning point, a civil rights milestone in the world of transportation law. For Naomi, it was simply an ending she had never wanted but had been forced to see through. As she left the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Carter, do you feel vindicated? Do you plan to expand the investigation? What message do you have for others?" Naomi paused only once, standing at the base of the courthouse steps. Her breath made small clouds in the winter air. "The message," she said softly, "is that silence protects no one, not even those who believe they're safe inside it." Then she walked on, inside. Claire was being led through the side door toward holding. Her footsteps were slow, almost reluctant. She turned once, her gaze meeting Naomi's retreating figure through the glass wall. There was no anger there now, only recognition. For the first time, she understood the full weight of what she had destroyed. Later that night, footage of the verdict aired across every major network. The image of Naomi exiting the courthouse became an emblem of restraint and moral clarity, a quiet challenge to an industry that had long ignored its own shadows. Editorials called her the CEO who chose principle over profit. But those who knew her well understood she hadn't chosen heroism. She'd chosen decency, and decency had demanded everything. In the weeks that followed, Aurora Air implemented sweeping changes, new training programs, independent oversight, anonymous reporting channels. The industry called it the Carter Standard. I remember watching the coverage from my own living room, the flicker of the TV reflecting against the window. The anchors kept saying words like landmark and historic. But all I could think of was that quiet moment in the cabin, the sound of a name tag hitting the floor, the silence that followed. That was where justice had really begun. 8 months later, it had only found its echo in marble halls and legal language, somewhere, far from the courthouse. A boy named Lucas opened a letter from Brookfield Academy. It said that a new foundation unnamed had stepped forward to cover his tuition through graduation. Justice, I thought, doesn't end in punishment. Sometimes it continues quietly, rebuilding what was nearly lost. And that's the part most people never see. The glass tower of Aurora Air headquarters caught the early morning light like a blade. From the top floor, the city of Harborview looked smaller than it had ever been, neat, ordered, almost peaceful. Inside, Naomi Carter stood by the panoramic window, a quiet figure in a navy suit, hands clasped behind her back. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, but there was fatigue in her eyes, the kind that lingers after the storm has passed, but the cleanup remains. It had been 14 months since the verdict. Aurora Air had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Carter Reform, as the press called it, had redefined corporate ethics across the industry. Every new hire underwent bias and empathy training. Every complaint was reviewed by an independent board. A dozen mid-level managers had been dismissed for misconduct, and a few quietly resigned before the system reached them. Naomi didn't gloat. She simply worked. On her desk, a chart glowed faintly on the tablet screen. Employee satisfaction, pulsing 31%. Customer trust index, pulsing 24%. The numbers weren't just statistics. They were proof that decency could, in fact, be measured if one had the patience to look. But beneath the surface, she knew. The world didn't change that quickly. It only pretended to, while waiting for people to forget. Her assistant, Maya, knocked gently on the open door. "Ms. Carter, the morning report from operations is ready. Also, the foundation wants your approval on the next round of scholarships." Naomi nodded, taking the folder. She didn't open it right away. Her gaze lingered instead on the small photo frame beside her laptop, a picture of a woman in a faded flight attendant uniform, smiling, eyes proud. Her mother? Sometimes. Naomi still wondered what she would have said about everything that happened. "I'll review the scholarships myself," Naomi said finally. "Let's prioritize applicants from underfunded schools this round." Maya smiled. "Already filtered that way. You always think ahead." Naomi's lips curved in a faint smile. "No, I just remember what it's like to be on the other side, across the city, far from the glass towers and corporate order." The hum of forklifts filled a different kind of morning. At the Bayfront Logistics Warehouse, Claire Whitmore adjusted her gloves and bent to lift another crate onto the conveyor line. Her face was older now, her hair dull under the harsh fluorescent lights. The thin fabric of her orange vest clung to her shoulders. Her sentence had ended 2 months ago, but the world outside prison hadn't softened. No airline would touch her name. Even the local grocery refused to hire her after the trial coverage resurfaced online. The warehouse had taken her on only because they needed night shift labor. She didn't talk much anymore. Most of the younger workers didn't know who she was, though sometimes she caught them whispering. "That's her," they said quietly. "The one who hit that CEO?" She pretended not to hear. During lunch breaks, she sat alone near the loading dock, staring at the harbor beyond the fence. She often thought about Lucas, his school, his future. The day she was sentenced, she had promised him things would get better. They hadn't. Now 14, he attended Harborview Public, a crumbling school with overcrowded classrooms and teachers who rotated out every semester. His grades had fallen. He had stopped drawing, stopped smiling. The scholarship had been his escape. Losing it had been his first lesson in how the sins of parents echo quietly into their children's lives. Claire still blamed Naomi sometimes. On bad days, she convinced herself that the CEO had ruined her life out of pride. On better days, fewer and fewer, she admitted to herself that Naomi had simply refused to protect the lie Claire had built around her own decency. Once, during a rare day off, Claire walked past an electronics store window and saw Naomi's face on a muted TV broadcast. The caption read, "Aurora Air's CEO discusses industry reform at Civil Rights Forum." Claire froze, staring at the calm poise of the woman she had once humiliated. The news anchor's lips moved, but the sound was lost behind the glass. All Claire could see was Naomi's expression, measured, intelligent, serene, the kind of dignity that made rage look small. She turned away quickly, clutching her jacket tighter. At school, Lucas had been called to the counselor's office. A kind woman with gray hair and patient eyes handed him a brochure. "There's a scholarship program for students interested in engineering," she said. "It's from a private foundation. They're anonymous, but it's fully funded. You should apply." Lucas nodded silently. The brochure logo caught his eye, a faint silver crest, the same pattern his mother's old airline used to have. He didn't say anything, but later that night, he asked her, "Mom, did you ever know someone named Naomi Carter?" Claire froze. Her hand tightened around the cup she was washing. "Why?" she asked. "She's the one who runs that scholarship," he said. "They said she helps kids like me. Kids who—" His voice faltered. "Who need a second chance?" Claire stared at him, heart pounding, but her face stayed still. "You should apply," she said softly. He did. 2 months later, he received the acceptance letter. Full tuition, supplies, mentorship program. There was no signature at the bottom, just the line sponsored by the Carter Initiative for Equal Futures. When he told his mother, she smiled weakly. Tears caught at the corners of her eyes. "That's good, baby," she whispered. "That's really good." She didn't tell him the rest. She didn't say that the woman whose name was on that letter had once been the victim of her cruelty. She didn't say that mercy sometimes feels heavier than punishment. Back at Aurora Air, Naomi reviewed the new scholarship files late into the evening. When she reached the last name on the list, she paused. Lucas Whitmore. His application essay was short, almost shy. It spoke of rebuilding things that break, of learning how machines and people fail. Naomi read it twice before closing the folder. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Let's move this one to the priority review," she said quietly. Maya glanced over. "That name looks familiar." "Any reason?" Naomi shook her head. "No reason at all." Outside, the city lights flickered on across Harborview. In one part of it, a boy folded his scholarship letter carefully beside his bed. In another, his mother lay awake, staring at the ceiling of a small apartment, listening to the faint hum of airplanes overhead. And in an office high above, A woman who had once been humiliated on one of those planes watched the same sky and thought not of vengeance, but of continuity, of how pain, once transformed, could feed something greater. I remember thinking that night, watching the skyline from the newsfeed, justice hadn't ended in a courtroom. It had simply evolved less about retribution, more about repair. Naomi Carter had proven that true power isn't in making others pay. It's in ensuring no one else has to suffer the same wound again. And somewhere in that quiet exchange between two unseen lives, the woman who fell and the woman who forgave the world tilted a little closer toward balance. The morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Naomi Carter's corner office, catching the steel and glass of Harborview's skyline below. From up here, the world looked ordered, almost tranquil. But Naomi knew better. Change was never tranquil. It only looked that way from a distance. Her staff had gathered behind her, executives, managers, flight instructors' faces from every background, every story. The new Aurora Air team reflected what the company had become: diverse, measured, imperfect, but awake. Naomi turned from the window and spoke without notes. Her voice was low and even, the same tone she used when she wanted every word to land. 8 months ago, she began. This airline stood at a crossroads. We could have chosen silence. We could have issued a press statement, made a few adjustments, and waited for the world to forget. But we didn't. We chose to face what we'd become and who we'd failed. She paused. The room stayed quiet. When people ask why I stayed calm that day, she continued, I tell them anger is easy, silence is easier. The hardest thing is to stay present, to make sure the lesson is learned, not just felt. A ripple of recognition moved through the room. Several employees who had been on the old flight crews looked down, remembering. Naomi went on, discrimination doesn't need villains. It only needs bystanders. Every time we stay silent in the face of injustice, any injustice, we're helping it breathe. And that's not what Aurora Air will ever be again. The word again hung in the air like a promise. Behind her, the screen displayed a live image of the newly refitted Flight 732 preparing for departure. Its crew stood at the gate, men and women, white and brown, tall and short, young and seasoned. The company's first all-inclusive leadership rotation. Naomi smiled faintly. That Flight 732 once represented failure. Today, it represents what happens when people decide not to look away. That's what I ask of all of you. Don't look away. Someone began to clap, softly at first, then more joined. Naomi lifted a hand to quiet them. Save that, she said gently. Use it when you see someone being overlooked, or dismissed, or treated as less. Speak then, because silence, she paused, her eyes steady, is complicity. The room went still again, then, quietly. The applause returned no longer polite, but resolute. Later that afternoon, Naomi stood on the tarmac beside the boarding bridge, the wind tugging lightly at her coat. She watched the new flight crew line up at the base of Flight 732, smiling for a group photo. The plane's silver body gleamed beneath the sun, the Aurora Air logo bright and unblemished. She walked toward the steps. Cameras clicked as she shook hands with the captain, a young Latina woman named Isabel Torres. Ready to take her up? Naomi asked. Isabel nodded. More than ready, ma'am. Naomi smiled. Good. Make it a flight. People remember for the right reasons this time. As Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge, a familiar sound reached her, the faint echo of passengers boarding, the murmur of greetings, the rustle of luggage wheels. Life. Continuing. Inside the cabin. The energy was different now. The air felt open, unforced. A family of 4 took their seats, chatting easily with a flight attendant. An elderly black couple settled into 1A and 1B, laughing softly as they adjusted their seatbelts. The cabin lights reflected warmth instead of tension. Naomi walked slowly down the aisle, glancing at the faces. There was no trace of fear, no hint of that old unease. Just people flying together, unremarkably equal. When she reached seat 1A, she paused. For a moment, she could still see the ghost of that earlier day, the sharp sound of a slap, the collective gasp, the flicker of cell phones rising like judgment. It was strange how the mind preserved both pain and triumph in the same frame. She sat for a moment, letting the hum of the engines fill the silence. From this seat, the world had once felt unbearably small. Now, it felt wide again. I remember watching that broadcast. The network carried it live. Naomi Carter speaking from inside the very cabin where everything began. She didn't talk about punishment or reform. She talked about conscience, about how silence, left unchecked, becomes culture, and culture decides who gets to stand and who must kneel. Her final words that day were simple. Every injustice survives on quiet consent. She said, "When you see it, name it. When you hear it, stop it. Because if you do nothing, you've already chosen a side." The audience in the terminal applauded as the jet's doors closed. The aircraft rolled away from the gate, sunlight flashing against its windows like a heartbeat. From above, as Flight 732 climbed through the clouds, the skyline of Harbor View stretched beneath it, steel and water, history and hope. In one of the city's warehouses, Claire Whitmore looked up from her lunch break and saw the plane passing overhead. She didn't know it was that flight. She only knew that something about its steady ascent made her pause, just for a second, before returning to work. Up in the cockpit, Captain Torres smiled as she reached cruising altitude. Flight 732. "Clear skies ahead," she said into the mic. Naomi, seated in 1A once more, gazed out at the endless blue and thought not of vengeance or victory, but of quiet accountability. The kind that doesn't need to be remembered, only continued. Justice, she had learned, isn't a single event. It's a habit sustained by those willing to speak when others would rather stay silent. And in that silence between the engine's hum and the heartbeat of the sky, the message lingered. Silence is complicity. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Flight 732, when silent justice spoke. We know you have countless choices online, and the fact that you chose to stay means more than you think. It's not just attention, it's awareness and heart. Tonight's story wasn't just about a slap, a verdict, or a twist of power. It was a mirror held up to society, a reminder that sometimes silence itself helps injustice survive. When Naomi chose wisdom over anger, she didn't just reclaim her own dignity. She spoke for everyone who's ever been dismissed, disrespected, or told they didn't belong. If this story made you pause for even a moment to reflect on respect, empathy, or the quiet strength of doing what's right, please hit like to let us know that kindness and awareness still matter. Share this video to spread the message that silence, in the face of injustice, is a form of complicity. And subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the moral heartbeat of our world stories, where justice doesn't shout, but speaks through truth and integrity. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing even in silence that decency still has a voice. The world becomes a better place when good people choose to speak up.